Hello there, fellow truth seekers. Doug Foster here again with you on this here Shabbat. I'm thankful to be here with you, and I hope that all of you have been blessed since our last study. I just want to do a little clarification from my last video. I don't want anybody to think that we're not supposed to try to witness to everybody that we can. But the point I was trying to make about that, about obedience, is that we need to be led by the Ruach. We cannot, go out on our own just because we say, oh, well, I'm going out here and I'm going to do this. No, we need to be obedient, and that means that we need to listen to the Ruach. And if he leads us to go, if he leads you to go out on the street corner and preach, then you go do that. But you must be led, or else it's going to be fruitless. Okay, now to this week's subject, I want to talk about pagan traditions and how they've infiltrated the church. And it's like I've said before, you tell these people that Christmas is pagan, and the reason I'm doing this is because we're coming into that season, when people are going to be doing these pagan traditions, is that, you'll tell them, hey man, that, oh yeah, we know, but we like to do it, it's fun, and what's harm in it? We're giving, but really, from what I've seen, in my own life around Christmas, I mean, it's a miserable time for a lot of people, and no joy or happiness and all that stuff. And then this ever, trying to one up people, with going out here and spending money they don't have to buy a bunch of gifts that nobody wants. I can't really see how that is honoring our Messiah. And what I want to do is I want to show you in Scripture where it talks about one of the traditions of Christmas, which is the Christmas tree, and it basically tells us, hey, don't do this, don't do this practice. But I'm going to start, by going to I'm going to start at Leviticus. Chapter 23, and this is the feasts of our Elohim, our God. All right, and I'm not going to run down through all of them because there's 7 of them. But what I want to kind of give you the gist of it, and it's I'm starting at the first verse in chapter 23 of Leviticus. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, concerning the feast of the Lord, which you shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my feast. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of rest and holy convocation. Ye shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. These are the feasts of the Lord, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their seasons. In the 14th day of the first month at even is the Lord's Passover. Now, what I want to get, kind of bring up here, and I'm not going to get deep into it because it's kind of complicated, but the Hebrew people had 2 calendars. Okay, they had 2 different calendars, and the first one is a calendar that gives them the months and the days that go all the way back to Adam. And then they had another one that they made. It had to do with something else. Sorry about that, folks. Kind of had a little intermission there. But so they had these 2 different calendars. So the first month of the Hebrew calendar in the first calendar was Aviv, because their B's are pronounced with the V's, like Aviv. But on the second calendar, it is the month of Nisan. okay, which is the seventh month. But anyway, the Passover that took place when the Messiah was crucified was the 14th day of Nisan, or on the other calendar, the 14th day of Aviv. And we know he was crucified in 31 AD. Okay, and the 14th day of Nisan fell on a Wednesday. So we know that the Messiah, the night before, it says that he kept the Passover, the Passover and then the Day of Atonement. The Passover, he kept the Passover supper with his disciples in the upper room. And then they went out, and they come and laid hands on him, and took him into custody, and they tried him all night. And the thing is that those trials they were having, according to their own law, was forbidden. They were not to do that, but they did. And the trial was supposed to take place in the temple, not at the high priest's house, but it was at Caiaphas's house. And they're supposed to be held in the light, which means in the daytime. They were supposed to be, if they had an issue against somebody, they were supposed to be able to defend themselves, to bring a witness to bear witness for them. So they violated all of these laws of Elohim concerning trials. And then they, was also taking him back and forth, and they wasn't supposed to, the Goyim or Gentiles or whatever were not supposed to have any part in this trial, but they did. They took him to Pilate, or to Herod, and then to Pilate, and then from Pilate back to Herod, and from Herod back to Pilate. They was back and forth. And so we know that was the night of the Passover, because you got to understand, according to the Hebrew way of rendering the days, the next day began at sundown. When the sun set, that was the next day. So if the sun had gone down and they had their Passover meal, okay, because that means that it was Wednesday when they were having their Passover meal, which was at night, because Tuesday at sunset was the next day. It began the next day, which was Wednesday. So they began eating their Passover meal, and then they were out, because you were supposed to go, during Passover, you had to be in Jerusalem and go to the temple. That was, but they were in the garden, I think the Garden of Gethsemane, and they came, with the temple soldiers or whatever. They came up there and they apprehended Christ and took him down there, and they began this trial all night. And then by the next day he had been condemned, and they, sometime that morning around 9 o'clock or so, they, started the procession towards Golgotha and took him up there and nailed him to the stake and put him up. And he gave up the ghost somewhere close to, because we know, this is in March, so the days are still, they're getting longer and longer, but they're still, going to sunsetting at, probably 7 o'clock or something like that. And so he died right before, and they put him in the tomb at sundown. Okay, he was in there. Okay, so this is the end of the day of Passover, Wednesday. All right, so they put him in the grave, and it says he would be in the grave 3 days and 3 nights. Not part days and part nights. I mean, because if you look at Easter, we, in modern times, they celebrated, Good Friday is the day he was put in the ground, put in the tomb, and then he resurrected on Sunday morning. I mean, the math does not add up. And if you look at the scriptures, he said that, the Pharisees was, show us a sign so that we might believe. And he says, I'm not going to give you any sign. There's not going to be any sign given except for the sign of Jonah. As he was in the belly of the great fish, 3 days and 3 nights. Literal. Then, and, again, people say, well, the Greeks kind of could render 3 days and 3 nights is like 3 partial days and 3 partial nights or whatever. Well, but you got to remember, Christ is not quoting the Greek New Testament. He is quoting the Old Testament, book of Jonah. All right, so he's using the Hebraic rendering of 3 days and 3 nights. And so he went in at sundown, on the day of Passover at sundown. So that was the beginning of one of those days and nights. So that would have made it Thursday. So from that evening of Thursday to the next evening was a day and a night. Then a day and a night for Friday. Then a day and a night for Saturday. And he was raised at sundown on Saturday. When the Sabbath day ended, he was resurrected. That's the reason he was already there in the garden before the sun had come up on Sunday morning. He was already there, because it says that Martha came before the sun had come up to put herbs and ointments on his body. But the stone was rolled away, and the burial cloth was just laying there. I mean, he was not there. He was, she thought he was a gardener. She said, where have they laid him? Where did they take him? And he says, he's not there. The angels told her, he's not here. And then she went out there, well, where did they take him or whatever? And the Messiah was talking to her, and she didn't recognize him because, for one thing, he appeared like he was when he was crucified. They had pulled his beard out. I mean, they done him, we have no idea about how horrendously he was treated. I mean, they yanked his beard out. I got a beard, and I know what it would probably be. I mean, I've got it yanked on or whatever, messing, get it hooked on something, and get it yanked. I mean, it hurts. So I can imagine having it all pulled out. And he's probably scarred and all, but he appeared to her the way that he had, been before he was, while he was being crucified. So she didn't recognize him. So that right there, that kills their Easter myth all to pieces. And because the thing about the Hebrew Passover is it didn't fall on the same day every week or every year. I mean, it just happened that year on the 31st, 31 AD. The 14th of Nisan fell on Wednesday. So, the next year it would have probably been on Thursday. Because, each year, it still was on the 14th of Nisan. I mean, we've got days on our calendars. For example, Christmas, it doesn't fall on the same day every year. It's the same date, December 25th, but it doesn't fall on the same day. It's a different day every year. And so that's the way the Passover was. And so that's how we can know. And it's the same thing with the Christmas, about, in fact, I'll give you, as far as doing I've got a verse here that I want to read to you about Easter in the book of Acts. And this is where a lot of people get this from, as far as about Easter in Acts chapter 12. It's verse 4, but I'm going to read from verse 1. It says, "Now about that time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded the further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread." Now, what you got to understand is the day after Passover began the days of unleavened bread. Now, the first day of it, the first day was a Sabbath of unleavened bread. It was a high day. Okay, and I can take you back there to Leviticus, and I can show you where. All right, now listen. It says, okay, these are the feasts of the convocation, and it says, and on, I said that the 14th day of the first month was the Passover. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto the Lord. 7 days must ye eat unleavened bread. In the first day ye shall have an holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein. It was a Sabbath. There was 7 Sabbaths besides the 52 weekly Sabbaths, and this is one of them. The first day of the week of unleavened bread was a Sabbath, and that's why when it talks about, it's talking about the Sabbath, about Christ's crucifixion and all during that time. They wasn't talking about the Saturday Sabbath. They were talking about the Sabbath that was the first day of unleavened bread, because it says a Sabbath. The Saturday Sabbath was the Sabbath. Okay, the Sabbath. But then it says, and a Sabbath. And it was talking about the first day of unleavened bread, because on that day they couldn't do anything. They couldn't do any labor. But the next day, which would have been Friday, Martha went and gathered all the stuff that she needed to prepare to go and put this ointment and these herbs and stuff on the body of the Messiah in the tomb. Because she would have had to done it then, because she couldn't do it on Saturday, because that was the Sabbath, the Sabbath. So she only had that one day to do it. So, there's a whole lot of the stuff that, that they try to put out there about Easter that is not consistent with what the Scriptures tells us. And with what I'm reading here, this is Leviticus. I mean, they kept these things, religiously. I mean, these festivals, these feasts, and and so there was a whole week of unleavened bread. I mean, I just read that to you. It says, "But ye shall offer an offering made by fire unto the Lord 7 days, and the 7th day is a holy convocation, and you shall do no servile work therein." See, so the first day was a servile day, and the 7th day was. So, they could not do any work in those days. They were Sabbaths. And so, and these other ones, I mean, you can keep on reading in Leviticus 23, because this is about all of the festivals, feasts. But the point I'm trying to make here is that you know, the days as they were rendered concerning around the Passover, you know, there was things they could not have been doing that they tried to act like they were doing because these Sabbaths, and they kept these things, man. I mean, they were religious about it. Like I say, they were zealous. That's why the priest was trying, as you know, when they made the deal with Judas to betray the Messiah, they were trying to make it so that it would happen at some time other than on Passover, because they did not want it to happen on the Passover. But you know, but the Messiah was doing the directing on this, and he made it all happen exactly as it was told in these feasts. These feast days they're what is called the Moedim, the appointed times. They are pointing to the Messiah, that he would fulfill these things on these days, like his birth. He was not born on December 25th. This is, you know, again, this is a very well-established fact that he was probably born on the Feast of Tabernacles, which is in September. You know, and by the description of the shepherds being out in the fields at that time, you know, would tell you it wasn't in winter, because they have some cold winters over there in Israel. You know, I mean, it's not like we think. You know, we think it's all sort of subtropical or something, but it's not. You know, they have snow and they have winters, hard winters over there. So you know, it wasn't in winter. I mean, it was, you know, it was just it was during, you know, a time when they were still grazing their sheep and animals out in the fields. And so he was born somewhere, they believe, somewhere around 9/11, if you can, you know, imagine that. But, you know, I don't know that for an absolute fact, but they do know he was born in that period of time, somewhere around there. And I believe he was born on the Moedim. And I think it was the Feast of Trumpets, because that was heralding him in, you know. But anyway, so, you know, when we look at Easter, it comes from the word Ishtar, which was a pagan goddess, the goddess of fertility. That's why you have the Easter eggs and the rabbits and all that stuff associated with Easter, because it was you know, supposedly to do with the rebirth of the sun god, and Mithra, and many other names. I mean, you know, Osiris, you know, out of many one. You know, there's all these different names for this god, but it's the same God, just different names. And it all has to do with sun worship. Sunday, day of the sun god Mithra. You know, Christmas was based on a Roman holiday called Saturnalia, that lasted from, like, I think December 21st through 24th or something like that, and then they would have their day of the sun god, the 25th. But they were worshiping the same thing. I mean, it's the sun god or whatever. And they give out gifts. They had Christmas trees. And of course, the Christmas tree thing goes way back. You know, before, you know, 500-600 BC, or even earlier, you know, but we know at least to 500 plus BC, which is 500 years before the Messiah appears. And we can see this in Jeremiah chapter 10. All right, and I'm going to go to Jeremiah chapter 10. All right, and you listen to what this says here and see if you know, what it sounds like to you. I'm going to begin at verse 1. This is Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 1. Hear ye the word which Yahweh speaketh unto you, O house of Israel. Now we got to establish this while we're at it. The house of Israel was the northern kingdom. You had the house of Judah in the southern kingdom, and the house of Israel in the northern kingdom. You know, I've talked about this before. We're during the time after Solomon had died, his son Rehoboam and Jeroboam, who came and was leading, Jeroboam was leading these 10 tribes, and Rehoboam, he was of the tribe of Judah, the house of Judah, and it came down to taxation. They were just overtaxing people, and really putting a real hurting on people, and they was wanting them to give them some relief from these taxes and stuff. And of course Rehoboam listened to his young advisors rather than listening to the older, wiser advisors, and increased the taxes, made the burden even greater. And so it brought about a civil war, and 10 of the tribes went north, and they became the house of Israel. And the Judah and Benjamin and a portion of the Levites stayed there in the southern part of Israel, in Jerusalem, where the temple was at. And so when it's talking here, it's talking about the house of Israel, the northern kingdom. It says that because Jeremiah, they call him the weeping prophet. He was weeping over the house of Israel. And really at this time here, this is, probably 750 BC. Because, so that's what I was saying. I mean, this tradition about the Christmas tree, this is ancient. It goes way past. So, because he's talking to the house of Israel. They ain't went into captivity yet under the Assyrians. So if they haven't gone into captivity, because they went into captivity under the Assyrians somewhere around 739 BC, somewhere between there and 750. So this is somewhere before that period. So it's at least 739 BC, because I don't know exactly how long from the time that he's doing this preaching, prophesying to the house of Israel before they went into captivity. But anyway, he says, thus saith Yahweh, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the heathen are dismayed by them. For the customs of the people are vain, for one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. They deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers, that it move not. Sounds like a tree stand, don't it? They are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born, because they cannot go. You got to tote them, and you got to put them where you want them at, don't you? Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good. Now, if that ain't a Christmas tree, I don't know what is. They were practicing this stuff, and like I say, from what I understand, I mean, I've done a little bit of research on it, but it goes all the way back to Egypt. So, it goes back probably another 1,000 years, that tradition of doing it. And I know from some of the other stuff, like the ball ornaments that they put on the trees, it was, and I don't want to get real graphic here, but from what I understand, what they would do is they put these trees up and they would put these silver ornaments and stuff on them. And then the men would go and take their scrotum sack and they would take and go and throw it up on the tree, and that's where that tradition comes from. Because the tree represents a phallic symbol. And if you do some studying about Osiris and Isis, that, you know, supposedly his brother killed him and cut him up into 14 pieces, and they only found 13, and the one they didn't find was like his, you know, his phallus. And you have all these phallic symbols all over the place. You know, these like the Washington Monument. You know, these obelisks. They you know, there's one there. There's one over there at Vatican City in Rome. There's one over in the city of London. You know, there's one in Cairo. There's one in all of these big cities around the world. They've got them, and they are considered to the occultist. They are phallic symbols, and they are power. You know, they have, you know, this energy around them, this occultic energy, just like with the rotundas, these domes on top of these structures, like the Capitol in Washington, the dome over St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. That is a vaginal symbol. And that's the reason they usually have these things, you know, like the Capitol and the Washington Monument are aligned like this here, and they, you know, whenever it goes down over that reflecting pool, they come together. I mean, but you can see how these traditions and these you know, occultic pagan practices go way back, you know. And like the Yule log, that's human sacrifice. That's sacrificing babies is what that symbolizes. You know, because these people, they, you know, and I'm going to bring that up now here in Deuteronomy, and I've brought this up before, these scriptures, because you can never, you know, emphasize these enough. This is what the Father says. It says, observe and hear all these words. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 12, starting at verse 28 and going to verse 32. Observe and hear all these words which I command thee, that it may go well with thee and with thy children after thee forever. When thou doest that which is good and right in the sight of Yahweh thy Elohim, when Yahweh thy Elohim shall cut off the nations from before thee, whither thou goest, to possess them, and thou succeedest them and dwellest in their land, take heed to thyself that thou be not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before thee, and that thou inquire not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so will I do likewise. Thou shalt not do so unto Yahweh thy Elohim, for every abomination of Yahweh which he hateth have they done unto their gods. For even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods. What thing soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it. Now he's telling you right here to not do like, you know, when they come into the land and they drive these people out, they, you know, they kill them off or they drive them out. Do not follow after their gods. Do not do those things which they do to them gods or unto them gods. Don't do that, because I consider that an abomination. I hate it. Don't worship me that way. And he tells us how to worship me, and I just read to you from Leviticus about his festivals, his feasts. And, you know, the Messiah kept those feasts. Paul kept them. Peter kept them. They kept them after the crucifixion of the Messiah. Because we know that these things that he gave them, these are the things that he says, this is how I want you to worship me. You know, and keep my commandments. Keep my Sabbaths. That's how he commanded us to worship him. And those things ain't never changed. I mean, I say this over and again, but it's something you just can't say enough. He says, I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. I change not. I am Yahweh. I change not. So he never changes. His way that he wants to be worshipped never changes. And it's like I said before, that the only thing that's changed concerning because this is one book. It ain't two separate books. It's one book. And in Revelation 22, it says if you add to it or you take away from it, he's going to add the plagues, that are in there, or he's going to take your name out of the book of life. We are not to add to anything that he has given us or take away from it. And when we add these pagan holidays and these pagan traditions, these traditions of men, to what he has given us, then we're taking away from it, aren't we? Or we're adding to it. And, he's made it clear there in Leviticus, the days, the feast days that he wants us to keep. And the things here in Deuteronomy that we are not to do concerning worship of him. And, again, the only thing that has changed from this, as I said before, is the Levitical priesthood and the sacrificing of animals. Other than that, nothing else has changed. The Messiah was our sacrifice, blood sacrifice once and for all. And he is of the order of Melchizedek. And I had a sister write me and ask me about Melchizedek. Kind of want to just throw this in there as a little side thing. As to him not having a mother and father. And my response is well, in the Genesis where it talks about Melchizedek, when he was interacting with Abraham, there's not a lot written as to about Melchizedek. He's kind of a mysterious person there. Well, I believe, that he was a pre-incarnate appearance of Christ. Because Christ appears all throughout the Old Testament. Or the first covenant books, whenever he, and he's the one that led the people out of bondage in Egypt. Moses was the instrument he used, but it was him, because it says he went before them in a cloud in the day and a pillar of fire at night. I mean, he was there with them the whole time. And that stone that was, that followed them, that they got the water out of. That's who he was. That's who it was. I mean, we see him all through the scriptures, and he said the volume of the scriptures is written of me. And he was talking about the first covenant books. I mean, because again, you have to kind of still understand that the books that we have in the renewed covenant did not exist. They hadn't been written yet. So they were referring, when they always refer about the scriptures, they're talking about what we call the Old Testament. Because that's what they had. That's what they had studied. And so, a lot of times they're quoting from that. Yahushua, Jesus Christ, he quoted from it a lot. From Leviticus and from Deuteronomy and from Daniel and Isaiah and the Psalms. I mean, he quoted from all of these. And I mean, we can go and when we read them, if we're doing like we're supposed to, studying this, we'll see it. We'll begin to see him here, and we'll see him over here, and we'll see him over here, where he appears. And sometimes it's the angel of the Lord, like when Joshua, when they had win against Ai, they done this on their own. They didn't get the okay from from Elohim to go and attack Ai. They just kind of done it on their own. And so Joshua, he was, just beside himself. He was laying on the ground, prostrate, weeping and ruing what had happened because they got their tail handed to them and by those people there. Because they were doing it of their own strength. It's this, like I was talking about, going and witnessing. You got to do it in the spirit, in the Ruach, not in yourself. He's going to go before us. And it's the same with the way it was back then. He went with them before them. They just had to believe. And it was about belief, as it always is. They had to believe that he would deliver these people into their hands. Well, he had been walking among them all along, I mean, they would, he'd be walking around there and they didn't even know it. And that's why he talked about, give them the law of how to deal with our body waste. You will go outside the camp so far and you will dig a hole and you will do your business and then you will bury it because I walk among you and I don't want to step in it. And so when Joshua, Christ, the Yahushua, the pre-incarnate, was there and he said, hey, what's the matter with you? Get up from there, quit that. They done this and they didn't get it from me. I mean, they just kind of took it on their own to go do this. And he says, well, if you hearken unto my voice and do that, it says, take your shoes off for you're standing on holy ground. You're standing on holy ground here. Well, there he was. He was walking among them, and he'd been doing that. And all through Scripture, he does that. Through the Old Testament, and I would say that he does today. I don't think that's changed any. Now, as far as like appearing to people, maybe sometimes he does appear to people. I don't know. I haven't had him, directly, appear to me. I mean, I would love to see. But I think he's still, but I think mostly how he is dealing, interacting with us today is through the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, is how he empowers us. Because he's sitting on a throne up in the Shamayim beside the Father, and he is running his kingdom from there. I mean, people say, oh, well, he's not going to sit on the throne until, the kingdom appears here on earth. Well, that's not so. When he went up, he says, set you, in Psalms it says, my Lord said to my Lord, set you on my right hand until I make, all the put all these nations under your feet. And he's ruling the spiritual kingdom. Right now, I mean, because he told us, my kingdom's not of this world. The kingdom of Elohim is within you. So he's ruling over us from his throne in the Shamayim spiritually. And he does it through his Ruach. And that's how we can know and understand this truth of this, of his word, that we... will want to know the truth of it, understand it, and apply it And we have to know that we're being led by the Ruach. We need to pray for discernment. To have discernment so we know, because like I said last time, how Satan, that joker is subtle. I mean, he's subtle. He's a smooth worker, man. And he's going to just, he's just going to twist things just enough that you're going to get deceived. And for people who do not have that discernment, he's going to be able to deceive you. That's the reason it says that he would deceive the entire world if it were possible. But, because we have the Ruach to teach us and to help us to be able to discern, he won't be able to deceive us. But most of the world he will. Because they these things are discerned spiritually. It's spiritual discernment. And that's how you discern between good and evil. And like I say, he's subtle, just like he done with Eve, when he deceived her. It says he was more subtle, more crafty than all the beasts of the field. Talking about the serpent. But now we have to understand again, this serpent dragon, he entered into him, and used him to come and deceive Eve. Because, there's two different words there that are in that study. One is Nakash, which is this dragon serpent. And then there is the Seraph or Seraphim that entered into the Nakash. But anyway, I'm getting kind of off the track here. But what I'm saying is that these traditions of men is one of the ways that he's able to deceive people, and he does it through just little twists and turns. And what happens is with these things, for example, here in the United States, Christmas was not allowed here. It was illegal to practice it because they knew it was a pagan tradition. The Puritans and that first came over here and all, they did not practice that stuff, and they made it illegal. But it was later in the 1800s, like the mid 1800s, I think, 1840s, 1850s, somewhere along in there, when they began to do that. And to practice these pagan traditions. And it was probably Germanic people that brought it over here, because a lot of them came over here during that period, and even earlier, from Germany, and settled here, and brought these traditions with them, and Krampus, Santa Claus or whatever, Saint Nick, and all that stuff. It was brought in here by them, but they wasn't the only ones in Europe that were practicing this stuff at that time. I mean, it was pretty much had spread all over there. But again, I mean, I showed you there in Jeremiah chapter 10 where this is, this Christmas tree stuff and all that was, going on way back. Like I said, maybe even all the way back to Egyptian times. So this is one of these things that has just kind of slipped its way all the way down. And then you get people, like I say now, these people that are deceived in these, these churches, these mainstream denominational churches, that, oh, well, yeah, we know this stuff is come from paganism, but we like to do it. It's fun, and we do a lot of good, and we've Christianized it. So it's okay. Well, not according to Deuteronomy, it ain't okay. He said not to do these things. Don't do it. However these people worship their gods, the things that they do to them, don't do that to me. I hate it, and it's an abomination. Don't do it. Not my words, his words. And so, I think, that, we got to get that in our head to stay away from that stuff. If we're going to keep any of these, any kind of feast or festivals, then we should be keeping the ones in Leviticus. The ones that he ordained. All right. Now, another scripture I want to bring here to people, and this is where they try to justify it, is in Acts. Let's see, Acts. I read that to you here, I think, but I'm gonna Acts chapter 12, and you can probably read into this however you want to read into it. But I'll kind of go into what I mean by that here after I read it. But this is chapter 12, and I'm going to start in verse 1 to verse 4. It says, "Now about that time Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread." Okay, we talked about that earlier, about how the Passover was on this day, the 14th of Nisan, and then the next day began the unleavened bread. Okay, that first day was a consecrated day. It was a Sabbath, the first day of unleavened bread, and then the seventh day of unleavened bread. Okay, well, I told you a while ago about how the Passover fell on Wednesday in 31 AD, and so the next day would have been the first day, the Sabbath of the unleavened bread, and it went for 7 days. All right. Now, here it says, "And when he had apprehended," in essence, he had apprehended Peter, then were the days of unleavened bread. "And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people." Now, I don't know, to me, see, you can interpret this a couple of different ways. And you can say, well, the disciples were celebrating Easter. Well, no. Listen to what it says here about how, "And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter." See, the Romans celebrated Easter, or Ishtar, which fell around that same period of time, because it was a spring festival of the spring equinox, okay, which is in March. So, the Nisan is around, March, okay, and so it fell right in that same period of time. That's how they kind of intermingled this in there. Again, the Romans like, well, we celebrate Easter, but we'll mix it with the Passover. Now, according to the Strong's Concordance, when you look at the word Easter there in the Greek, it is Pesach, which is 3957 in the Greek part of the concordance, number 3957, and it's Pesach, which is Passover. Okay, so either this is being said here because you got Herod involved here. So Herod it is talking about it's during Ishtar. You know, it's during the time of Ishtar, the festival of Ishtar, or whenever the English people began to translate this, they were already celebrating this day, okay, as Easter. Okay, and it was a tradition that they had inherited from the Catholics. Okay, and so because at that period in time in England and in Ireland and Scotland and Wales and all, the Catholics were still pretty heavily entrenched there. You know, I mean, you read about the Guy Fawkes, where they tried to blow up Parliament over there while King James was in there, because they were trying to blow it up because of him doing this, you know. I mean, and because they were trying to do this, and because, you know, this was published in 1611, and I think the Guy Fawkes gunpowder revolt, or whatever they called it, happened in like 1605, 1606, somewhere along in there, because they were Jesuits, Guy Fawkes and them. They were Jesuits from the Catholics, and they were trying to stop them from doing this. And around that same time is when the Douay-Rheims Bible came out from the Catholics. They came out with the Douay-Rheims Bible to counter the Geneva Bible, and which was a really accurate translation from the Latin, and from what the Catholics had in Latin. You know, he had went and reviewed thousands of documents, I think it said that he reviewed tens of thousands of documents, and transcripts and books, and interpreted it, and created the Geneva Bible. So it was a very accurate translation. And Tinsdale was another one, the Tinsdale Bible. I mean, same thing. I mean, very astute. And so to try to counter this, the Douay-Rheims Bible came out that the Jesuits over in France came out with and published, because they had to do something, because they were bleeding, followers. So they had to come out with a Bible that people could read for themselves, that was for the Catholic way. And so we see here, some of this stuff crept in here, but I will tell you this, that the King James is, probably 98 to 99% accurate. There's little translational errors that crept in here and there. But when you're talking people, 500 years ago, with the technology they had for printing these out, and going through tens of thousands of available documents and transcripts, and trying to compile this, I'd say that's pretty amazing. Because when you look at some of these other, like the Alexandrian stuff, where they got about 42, the Byzantine and Masoretic, Textus Receptus, the Greek and Hebrew texts, they got thousands and thousands of them, and they all pretty much agree with each other. But when you start looking at these Alexandrian texts, like the Nag Hammadi and stuff like that right there, none of them agree. They've only got like 40 some copies of these Alexandrian texts. The Nag Hammadi Codex is one, but and they don't agree. Everything in this here agrees. I mean, you will find something like the Easter showing up in there, but and in some of the newer translations, they actually put Passover in there. But again, when we look at the context here, it could have said that because the Romans were keeping that holiday at that point. that period of time. And so maybe they just, threw that in there because that was the time of year that because this is during the days of unleavened bread, and they're coming to the end of it, which was 7 days from Passover. Okay, so, if it's at the end of the days of unleavened bread, then that was probably during that period when the spring equinox was coming along, and so those people were celebrating Easter. Those people, the Romans and the pagans and all were celebrating the festival of Ishtar. And so, and that, it could be talking about it in that context. Is that true or not? I don't know. I'm just speculating here. I don't want to, say that this is absolute. But anyway, I'm bringing this up now because, of course, we're coming into the Christmas holiday season. But I would say, that I think Pentecost is around this time of year, and then there's another festival I think that's going on right now. That, if you're going to celebrate something, some kind of a festival or whatever, a feast day, then we ought to celebrate the ones that the Father laid out for us in Leviticus. Because again, I really don't believe any of those things change for us. I think He still intends on all of us keeping those things. Now, some of them I think, were set up to where you actually had to be in Jerusalem to take part in them. There were some of those that, like Passover was one of those. You had to, but we were told by the Messiah to keep Passover and to take communion and stuff, so in remembrance of Him. But because that was Passover evening, that He was having His last meal with the disciples, and they, He said, "Here, drink this. This is my blood that's spilled out for you. Here, eat. This is my body, which is given for you. To do this in remembrance of me." So it's during the time of the Passover. And so we are to do that and to keep that. But if He kept those days, and He was our example. And Paul tells us, that these things are given to us for our admonition and for our learning, and teaching, talking. And they were, like I said again, they didn't have the New Testament, they had the Old, and so that's what they were reading from, and that these things were for our learning, for our teaching in righteousness. Okay, well, if they didn't apply to us, why would they tell us that they do? And the Messiah came and said, "I came to reveal that which the Father has given unto me to reveal unto you," and for and He tells us over and again, keep my commandments, and these were commands, these festivals and stuff. There wasn't suggestions. And the dietary laws, they were commands. So He says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. And I'm not just talking about the 10 commandments. It's all of them. And so, not to try and, not that it's going to save you, but that's how our Father wants to be worshiped. And, He's laid it out how He wants us to worship Him. And these festivals, they're not for His sake. They are for our sake. They are for days of rest, to celebrate, to praise Him, to have fun. Everybody's like, well, Christians, man, they're supposed to be, that's not so. I mean, we're supposed to have joy and peace and happiness, and we do that by fulfilling His law, by keeping it. That's how we can have joy and peace. And these are, I've heard from people that keep these, and they say, man, it's really a blessing to them. And I intend on, I haven't been keeping these feasts, because for one, I really didn't know how, because a lot of it, because it's not been being carried down through the church as it should have been. And again, I think a lot of it, that came in there was because of people's resentment and hate of the Jews. They didn't want to do anything that these people were doing. And of course, those things, originally were supposed to be taught to us by the Hebrew people, to the Goyim and the nations and stuff. They were supposed to be a light. They were supposed to be proclaiming this. But they didn't do that. They kept it to themselves, and only if somebody came looking and seeking, because there was people that converted to Judaism, in the ancient days, and because he said if they do, they come here and they accept it and they want to be a part of it, then you take them in, you accept them, you had to circumcise them and all that stuff. If they're willing to do that, then you can bring them into to the fold of Israel. And but the early church did this. They did these things. They kept these festivals, these feasts. It was only, like I say, whenever it got the church in Rome. Got control of the mainstream media or mainstream religion. And they, because of Constantine and different ones, that they liked, they practiced all these pagan stuff, Christmas, Easter, all that kind of stuff. They practiced all that stuff, and they liked it, and they wanted to keep it, but they wanted Christianity too. All religions. And when you start looking at Catholicism, the Catholic Church and all, you can see elements of every religion in the world in it. And that right there in itself ought to be a big red flag to anyone. When you see it, all these temples of theirs with these icons that they call them icons, but they're idols is what they are, little statues everywhere. And you call them out on it and say, oh, those are icons, those are not idols. Oh yeah, they are. Anything that you use in in a religious context like that, that's an idol. It's, and of course the second commandment addresses that and says not to do it. And then there again in Deuteronomy 28, or, don't do or chapter 12, don't do these things. Don't do them. And they, of course, they're full of it, man. And of course, to a lesser extent, the Protestant church. In fact, they don't even call them Protestants anymore. They basically is like they're wayward children, because they ain't protesting nothing from the Catholic Church anymore. They're beginning to get drawn right back to the mother church, the mother of harlots, and they are becoming harlots. And everywhere you look, like in the book of Hosea, when he, told Hosea to marry this harlot, it was a type of Israel, the house of Israel. That they were a harlot, and he was going to divorce them. That it's always referring to religion when it talks about female or female image of it, like in I think it's in Revelation 13, where it's, this beast comes up and there's a woman riding it, in scarlet and purple. I mean, who wears scarlet and purple? It's always representative of a religious system. And so, and her daughters, or, in other words, these churches that came out of her, the Protestant Reformation, these churches, these daughter churches that, got created through the Protestant Reformation. And I don't know for a fact whether it's true or not, but it's, I've read some stuff here and there where it talks about that Islam was created by the Catholics. Muhammad is well established. Muhammad was a white man. Okay, and we went over there, and nobody really seems to know where he come from. Well, some people believe that he was out of the Knights Templar or something like that. I don't know, but that he was sent there to establish the religion of Islam, and then at some point in the future they would come together as one religion, and that they would use Islam as a sort of the sword of of their of their church to go out and kill people that won't bow down to the Blessed Virgin Mary, the BVM, the co-redemptrix. It's always been among Protestants anyway that solo fide, which is salvation through one, and that's Christ. Well, now it's co-redemptrix, that you can be saved by Mary too. Well, that's the Queen of Heaven. You go back in the Old Testament, it talks about her, that they don't have nothing good to say about her. And that's who they're worshiping. They're worshiping the Queen of Heaven, Ishtar, Astarte, Semiramis, Isis, whatever, you want to put on it, but it's the same entity, goddess worship. And, there's nowhere that it tells us to do that. It says that Mary, or Miriam was her name in Hebrew, was to, be blessed above all women, but that's all. There's nowhere that it says that she's to be worshipped. And of course, if you're keeping Easter, that's who you are worshiping. You're worshiping Ishtar. And if you're keeping Christmas, you're worshiping Mithra, Zeus, Saturn, whichever one of them you want to call it. That's who you're giving allegiance and homage to. You're not you can put in there and that baby and mother and all that. That's the BVM, and that comes down to Hiram Macbeth. In the Freemasonry, they're weeping over the son, or the death of I guess Osiris, and that he's born and becomes this Horus. Again, these names are different depending on which language you look at, but it's the same entities it's talking about. This birth and death thing, the birth of, the death of the sun going down to its lowest point and then coming back up at the winter solstice. It begins its march back up into the sky, reborn. That's all that stuff is. And it, through all these different cultures, when you begin to compare these gods and goddesses and stuff, there, and this infant, you keep seeing this mother and child kind of thing all over the place. And it's Horus, or it's, Semiramis, Isis and Horus, and Nimrod, Semiramis, and Tammuz. You start seeing it really that these are not different entities, different whatever. It's the same. It's the same ones, and they're just different culture, different language. They're talking about the same entities, just in a different language. And it's the same thing with the Catholic. I mean, they have adopted this same mother and child thing, and this is how Satan's going to deceive the whole world. Is through these religious commonalities between all these things, and that's why it calls it Mystery Babylon, mother of harlots. I mean, Mystery Babylon, because it started there in Babylon, Mesopotamia, and I've talked about this in previous videos about how it started in Mesopotamia. It wound up going to Medo-Persia, and then from Medo-Persia to Greece, and then from Greece to Rome. And it's the same religion, this mystery religion. And, basically all religions come from there, with the exception of Judeo-Christian belief system, that originated there in Israel. Well, actually in the wilderness is where it started at there but the preparation for it began with Abraham. I mean, it started back in the time of Abraham, and was the beginning of establishing this belief system and leading up to the establishment of a nation, Israel, in the land there, but it's been corrupted everywhere that Satan can corrupt it, and so I mean that's where these things come from, and that's why it's important for us to study and to learn. Let's see, I got some other scriptures here I wanted to read. Here, this is in Mark 7, 9 through 13. It says, "And he said unto them, Full well ye reject the commandment of Elohim, that ye may keep your own tradition. For Moses said, Honor thy father and thy mother, and who curses father and mother, let him die the death. But ye say, If a man shall say to his father or mother, It is korban, that is to say, a gift, by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, he shall be free. And ye suffer him no more to do aught for his father or his mother, making the word of Elohim of none effect through your tradition which ye have delivered. And many such like things do ye." They were doing all this stuff. I mentioned it before about, how I knew a pastor one time that was in seminary, and it was an area where they were Jews living there, and the guy's yarmulke come off his head, and he paid this guy $1 to pick it up for him, because that's work. Can't do no work on the Sabbath. They went overboard on this stuff, and they kept all these traditions, like the oral Torah and the Talmud. And then they've even brought in the Kabbalah, which that originated over there in Mesopotamia. They brought it back with them. Those ones that got into the temple over there that ultimately led to the leaving from the temple. The Zadok priest, ultimately left because of these people, how they had infiltrated into the temple, and they were bringing in all of this false doctrine and teachings. Let's see, Colossians. We got one here from Colossians. Okay. Well, Says, this is Colossians 2:8. Beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit after the traditions of men and the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. It says, for in him dwelleth all the fullness of Elohim bodily. He was all of it. He was the Father, he was the Son, he was the Word. He's the Word and the Ruach. He was all of it. But, Paul's telling us here, beware of these traditions and stuff, because they are snares. They are a snare, and, we need to, again, there in Revelation it says, come out of her, my people, and be not partakers of her sins, or receive of her plagues. Who do you think it's talking about? Her. This mother of harlots, this system. Come out of it. And that includes these Protestant churches that are, promoting and practicing these things. Come out of them too. Okay, 1 Peter. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 18. For as much as you know that ye were not redeemed with corruptible things as silver and gold from your vain conversations received by traditions from your fathers. See, all these things are traditions that have been received from our fathers, been passed down. And so after a bit, it just becomes kind of normalized, and, people don't get the connection between their origin, where they originated at, and between where in Deuteronomy chapter 12, the Father says, don't do these things, don't follow after these traditions, these customs of these heathen, pagan worshipers that, don't do these things that they do to their gods. Such as taking their children and passing them through the fire. And that was a common practice all throughout the ancient world, was sacrificing their firstborn to these gods. And the Hebrew people wound up doing the same thing when they caused their children to go through the fire. That's what it's talking about. It's talking about them taking their firstborn child and sacrificing them to Baal or to Moloch. And, they had these groves and where they had these great big statues of these entities that would have a great big cauldron, a metal cauldron, bronze or brass or something, in their arms, and they would build a fire under it and get it red hot, and then they would take their infant baby and lay it up there and sacrifice them to these entities, Moloch and Baal. And we're seeing that right now with abortion. That's all that is it's a form of sacrifice to these entities, Moloch and Baal. In fact, out there in Northern California, they have what they call the Bohemian Grove out there, where all these elitists go, and I mean even the political elite, presidents, stuff like that, go out there, and they run around, naked, and they have a big stone carving of Moloch, and they build a huge fire, and they symbolically throw logs in there, Yule logs or whatever you want to call them, in there in symbolic reference to sacrifice. And and they run around there naked, peeing on trees and all this stuff. I mean, and I'm talking about these so-called elite that are out there doing these things. Presidents that are going there, and if the truth's known, who knows, they may actually be really sacrificing humans or whatever out there. I don't know, but I know that this place does exist, and they do, all these elitists and people like that go there doing these things. And and of course, abortion in this country. I mean, there's been tens of millions of babies aborted to these entities, and that's why these people go insane. I mean, insane when you start talking about doing away with abortion. I mean, they get, to the point of where they would kill you if you, if they really thought that practice would be completely removed. I said they would probably be a civil war. I mean, and that ought to tell you about the condition of these people and their minds, that anybody would be willing to go to that extreme to continue to murder innocent babies. I mean, that says something about these people, about how evil they are. And they're the ones that do, really promote these traditions like Christmas and Easter and stuff. They just act like they're the best thing since sliced bread. And Halloween, that's another pagan holiday, pagan tradition. And really, probably Thanksgiving too. I mean, because that's a tradition, these fall festival things that's been going on for thousands of years, to their agricultural gods or whatever. I mean, I think if it's anything that has been inherited as a tradition from men, that is not commanded of us to do by the word of Elohim, then we shouldn't take part in it. Even if we don't keep his days, his feast days and stuff, we certainly don't need to be keeping these pagan ones. And I'm going to start, trying my best to keep these festivals that are in Leviticus, to honor the Father in his appointed days. And not just his Sabbath. So with that, I just kind of felt like this time of year was a good time to really kind of get the emphasis on this, since so many people do participate in this pagan ritual, to try and get it across to people that this is a practice that is not ordained by our Father or our Messiah. In fact, they are abomination to him. And we ought to look in, if we're going to keep anything, keeping his feast days. And you might find that you will be blessed for doing it and get great joy out of it. And so with that, it's a blessing for me to be able to do this, to come here and do a study in the Word on Shabbat, to give praise and glory and honor and esteem to our Elohim and our Messiah. And for those who might come upon this video that have not in the past, I pray that you would come to know our Messiah, Yahushua Jesus Christ, as your Savior. It's real simple to be justified before our Elohim, just by repenting of sin, wickedness, and renouncing that sin and wickedness, and to accept and believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of our Messiah. That he died to redeem us from the penalty of death. And then that you would confess him before others, and not be ashamed of him. And with that, I appreciate all you folks. I love you. I pray that you will be blessed. And as I always say, I appreciate you listening to me with an open mind. But you search the scriptures to see whether what I've said is so. Don't take my word for it. Do your homework. Be a good Berean and dig into the word and do some, historical research. It's like I said before, you can go outside of the Bible. Again, the Bible is our foundation for truth. I mean, we judge everything else by the truth of the Word. But we can go outside of the Scriptures to other texts to get historical context, to get a better understanding of how people, their customs and traditions, how they, why they believed the way that they believed, to get the histories. As a matter of fact, right now, of course, it's a lot of reading, and some of it, it's kind of heavy reading. But I'm reading the works of Josephus, Flavius Josephus. He was a first century Hebrew Jew. He was a Jew, and he recorded the Jewish wars between the Jews and the Romans. He was actually in a lot of those battles against the Romans, until they were finally, drove out of Jerusalem and out of Israel by the Romans. Eventually, they were there until about 125, 135 A.D. The temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. But they were still there. There were still some of them there until about 125, 135, whenever you had the last battle there at Masada, and they were ultimately driven out. But Josephus, he records, he was a historian, he records a lot of this stuff, and he also talks about the antiquities of the Jews, their history, from his perspective. And he talks about, too, heretics, people that were telling false history and stuff like that during his time, that he was answering against these people. So, we can read these kinds of texts to get some, clarification on the mindset of these people, how they, thought. And we can get a further understanding about how things were with the Romans, and their ultimate, taking over of that area, and how they operated. So we can get a better understanding when we read the scriptures, about the Romans and different things. We can get more context. The other thing is that you can get some more of the historical perspective of, like I was talking about, like the Assyrians, when the house of Israel went into captivity around somewhere between 725, 750 BC, they went into captivity by the Assyrians, and then I think it was probably around 529, somewhere in that area is when the house of Judah went into captivity into Babylon. Well, if that was the case, then basically the Assyrian Empire had collapsed by that time, and the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, had rose up and had defeated them. And in fact, by that time, Nineveh, which was an Assyrian capital, it was the largest city in the ancient world as far as we know, 1.5 million, 2 million people, and they had abandoned it and began to migrate. And of course today we believe, at least it's come to that maybe the Germanic peoples, the Slavic peoples, the peoples around that area where Germany, Austria, Luxembourg, Belgium, that area in there is where the Assyrians migrated to. There's a city there in Germany that's the oldest city in Europe. Going back to 500 or even earlier BC. And they have a lot of, over there in Germany, they have a lot of this stuff from Assyria that they've amassed over there, and that may be where the Nazis and them got Aryan from. It was really a reference to Assyria. But anyway, I'm just saying you can if you go and study some of the maps and some of the history outside of the mainstream, because they got a narrative that they are trying to portray, we can find out where the people of the house of Israel migrated to eventually become the British Isles and America. But anyway, again, I love you folks. I hope you be blessed, and I'll see you next time, Yahweh willing.